Welcome to the Owner to Owner podcast. I'm Michael Kerr, your host, and I'm also the founder of Kerr Capital, where for 22 years now I've worked alongside business owners. Owner to Owner is a business podcast to empower the owners of Australia's small and medium enterprises. Forget the slick stories of tech titans and unicorns. At Owner to Owner we get raw and we get real. Every Owner to Owner episode is a personal conversation with another business owner just like you. We explore the everyday struggles they face and the different pathways they tread to success. Practical advice and plenty of one percenters for better returns, less stress and more enjoyment. You'll find grit, laughs, maybe a few tears and some hard-won lessons only available from others who've been where you are, whatever your stage of ownership. Every owner has a compelling story to share, so join us to listen and to learn. There's very strong evidence that links improvement in bottom line business performance and increased business value with the successful implementation of an employee ownership program. That's true globally. In many businesses, employees are a natural buyer of the business. So if you're a business owner contemplating an exit, you really do need to consider employee ownership as part of that. I want to dig in today with Dr. Craig West, the founder of Succession Plus. Craig, a very big welcome to the Owner to Owner podcast. You are founder of Succession Plus, capitalised, and you're deeply involved in a lot of things, small and medium business. So welcome in.
Thanks very much for having me. Looking forward to it.
For 20 plus years now, you've written about, you've educated, you've advised, trained and delivered advice in and around employee ownership and more broadly exit planning and business valuation. But can you just give us a short overview of the Succession Plus model, your business, its model for employee ownership?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my background was as an accounting advisor to business owners. I found a lot of them coming to me looking at succession or exit or selling or retiring. And one of the things that I started to see was two really dramatic changes in the drivers of what was bringing people to me to ask about that. One was they changed from saying, I need to sell my business for $5 million to retire. So need was the key word there. I need to sell it for $5 million so I can retire. No one says that anymore. Most of the baby boomers have got more than $5 million. They don't need an extra $5 million. And so that changes the way they look at exit. The second thing was for the last 10 years in Australia, in many of our mid-market businesses, we've been in a really tight labour market. And so the idea of locking in key people and retaining staff and how do I motivate them without just constantly paying out more money, doesn't work forever, became really important. So those two things, this I don't need to sell it for $5 million. I'm loyal and I love the people that I've had working with me for 20 years and I actually want to look after them and do the right thing by them. And it's a tight labour market, sort of pushed everyone towards thinking about, okay, what do I do a bit differently that solves all those problems? And the obvious answer, as you said in the introduction, Michael, these are quite popular internationally. Employee ownership plans work to do those three things really well.
Yeah. So is there coming together of a bit of wanting to leave a legacy, share the success of the business with the practical consideration that, and we both know that employees in many businesses are so key to the sale and the future success of the business.
Yeah, and I mean, there's two parts to that as well. I mean, one of them is a lot of our clients are professional services firms, and in fact, the whole business is about the people. If you've got 100 architects or 100 engineers or 100 lawyers, the way that you make money is by charging people to use that expertise. And so it's part of your business model. And so staff turnover not only costs a lot of money, but it actually interrupts the business model. Every time somebody leaves, you've got to get someone new, you've got to retrain them, you've got to create new relationships with clients. The other part of it is, as you would know probably better than me, when people exit a business, if I sell my business tomorrow, somebody's still got to run it. Now, that's either got to be the new owner who may or may not know what they're doing or not, who may or may not have the right relationships and experience and technical expertise, but my staff already do. So if I can get it to a point where it's not run by me, it's run by 5, 10 key people in my business who are all part of the share plan and therefore rewarded and incentivized to run it, it makes it much more attractive to a buyer.
I've seen businesses where the owner eventually realizes that they're in the hands of some of the key employees, if not all the employees. There's this nervous discussion about it's time for me to move on. Sometimes that triggers a discussion around do you people want to buy it? But oftentimes it's like I'm fearful that if I tell them they'll leave, yes, they can leave, but they can also be critically important in whether you want to sell to them or to anybody else for that matter, because they're needed to run the business later. With Succession Plus, your target market, I just want to frame up what the specific work you do.
Yeah, so we work directly with business owners, normally founders or families of privately owned companies. So we don't do any work with listed or corporate businesses. And they're typically going to be what we would call the lower end of the middle market. So they're going to turn over between $5 million and $100 million. Some of them a bit bigger than that, a couple a bit smaller. There's also a real sweet spot in that market where probably between $10 million turnover and $50 million turnover. There are a lot of businesses in Australia that sit in that space. They're big, they're successful, they've been around for a long time, most of them. They're particularly good at a particular thing, architecture, engineering, accounting, whatever it might be. And there's still typically a lot of them still owned by baby boomers. So the exit and succession piece is quite important for them.
Yeah. And it sounds like there's a lot of service firms where, as we've already discussed, people are just so vital. They walk in, walk out, and the entire success of the place is about your people, staff, and your people, customers or clients. When you're pitching to a baby boomer owner on what are you saying the benefits are of your particular employee ownership for them, for staff, and then can we extend that to where you think that flows more broadly to the economy, because we do need to sustain as many of these $5 to $100 million independent businesses as possible.
Yeah, look, I think the first thing is the question's perfect because it talks about the fact that it's got to work well for all those stakeholders. You can't design an employee share plan that works really well for the founder but doesn't benefit the employees or doesn't benefit the business or doesn't benefit the customers. The ones that work really well have been specifically designed that the owner's better off, the business is better off, the employees are better off, and probably the customers and, wider network is better off. The other key thing about those businesses is they're typically more resilient and they are more sustainable, which means they last longer. And you're exactly right. The more of these businesses we can preserve and encourage to grow, they employ 20, 50, 100 different families, which means the town that they're in or the society they're part of benefits when they do well. You've got 100 employees doing well, then there's 100 families that don't have to stress out about money and that can go and invest or buy or send their kids to schools or donate money to the local charity. I mean, it compounds itself as you start to look at the implications wider than just a business.
Is there a mind shift needed for all parties when you start to contemplate employee ownership? Like, do things radically change? I'm sure your structure has a lot of advice to go with it on how you can't have people just turning up all of a sudden thinking, I want to get into the boardroom. But the mind shift that's needed, and can you comment on that?
Yeah, there's definitely a change in mindset and there's a change in behaviour as well. But the key thing about that is you're better off to try and do that gradually. So you're right. The worst thing you could do is suddenly have 50 employees coming in and telling you what to do and what they can and can't say, and I want a seat at the board table. I mean, that just won't work, clearly. But what does work is two things. One, we want to get the employees to start to think and act like an owner, not like an employee. And so the decisions they make then change slightly and their focus changes slightly, not just to what's in it for me, but firstly it becomes what's in it for us. Now we're in a team and we all own equities. How do we all benefit? And thirdly, it becomes what's the best thing for the business longer term? And that might actually be counterintuitively, that might be now employees saying, well, actually, we're better off not to give everyone a pay rise this year. We're better off to invest in this new piece of technology. It'll save everybody half an hour a day every year. And that's a longer term sort of thought process. So we call that ownership mindset, like thinking and acting like an owner rather than like an employee. And that's not to say that employees go in every day and think, what can I make a mess of, or how can I do a bad job? They don't. But giving them the training and the skill set and the framework to actually start to make decisions about owning and running a business is actually quite a different thing. You can be the world's best architect. And Michael, you would know this. You would have dealt with business owners who are brilliant at what they do, air conditioning or architecture or whatever, but doesn't make them necessarily a brilliant businessman.
No.
And employees are the same. So you've got to give them the education and the framework around how do we make better decisions? How do we collaborate better? How do we interact with the rest of our team better to help improve performance? And if you can do that, you get all the benefits. You get the psychological benefits of everyone being an owner and thinking and acting together, but you also get the financial benefits of the business performing better, making more money, expanding and growing, and then employing more people. It all sort of compounds on itself.
Yeah, there must be a direct line between what you're doing right now and the value of or the performance of the business. So in your structure, what is that in a practical sense? You become a part owner of an employee program. High level, the profits and dividends go back to all the employees, and there's some debt that's been needed. So that those dividends pay the debt down. Where an employee might crystallise is when the business is sold or when they themselves move on from the business.
Yeah, that's basically how it works. I mean, you're describing there a loan-funded plan, and that works exactly the way you've just described it. The employees jointly go and borrow money, they buy the business, they use the dividends that the business has paid from profits to pay down that loan over time until there is no loan, and then they own the business between them, and they keep the dividends for their future income and potential. And that model works really well. They then receive, they've got additional income now because they're getting income or profit share, dividends. They're also getting the capital gain in the shares. But as you said, they don't realise that until there's a sale or an external, PE firm comes in and invests in the business, or they retire and their shares are bought by the younger person that's coming through the system. So that can work well. The other way that we do it is without loan funding, and that works really well, but it's much slower. So the issue is, you've got a $10 million business and 50 employees. No one's going to sit there. They typically won't have the money to write a check that size today. But the owner's smart enough to say, well, actually, I don't need the $10 million today. Why don't we just sell down, 10% a year for the next 10 years? Okay. And we know that the cash flow and the dividends from the business will pay that. We agree that you'll run the business, you'll control it as a group. We'll set up some structures and rules around how all that works. But then you pay me $1 million a year for the next 10 years. I'm happy with that because I know the business is being looked after. Yep. You're happy with that because you get to buy the business without incurring any debt, but you're going to grow it gradually over time. Yep. And that scenario works well as well. Yeah.
So there must the owners that are open to that longer term exit for themselves. Can you talk about them? That's as you said at the beginning, maybe they're well established and they do want to see the business in communities. Some of these businesses employ 10, 20, 30 people. Without it, the community is much worse off. So, but that's to actually stay with the business and sell down over 10 years, quite a commitment to the people in the business, the employees and the business itself.
Yeah. And we're seeing a lot more of that. We're seeing a lot of owners now, as I said at the start, they don't need the $10 million to survive, to fund their retirement or to do whatever. They'll take it. They're happy to have it. There's no problem with that. Yeah. But they're also sort of looking at it saying, I don't need it today. What they're really attached to is the business. For a lot of these baby boomers, this is their baby. And, they want it to survive. They want the people that have worked with them for 20 years. I literally had a guy in my boardroom maybe 6 months ago now who giving me this speech about his staff, and he had a list, and he said 20 of these people have been here for more than 20 years. And he's literally got tears in his eyes, literally. Now, they're his employees. He loved them. He knew their kids. He knew their families. He knew when they got married. He knew what their husband did. So that guy's saying, you know what? If I can walk out of here and those 20 people end up with a life-changing amount of money, it might only be $500,000. They might just pay their mortgage off, or they might be able to go and do something, or they might be able to help their kids buy a house. It's life-changing. Yeah. Now, for him, he literally sat there with tears in his eyes. That was more important to him. Had I said to him, mate, I'll give you a check for $10 million right now, he would have said, no, thanks. I don't need that. What I need is for you to show me how to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's inspiring. And, I think there's also, there's this somewhere in some of your material, talked about where a sale being the end point of an exit plan is a bit limiting, because exit planning, succession planning a lot of it, I think, is structured around there's an end result in 2 years, and you may achieve that, and that may be what you want to do. But I think there's a lot of owners who they need a plan, but they don't need to be out. You're saying they don't necessarily need the money, and I think there's a lot of them that actually still need to have purpose and something to
They're
do,
very
because
connected.
and that's planning. So you have your governance and you have your operational structure, but there's still a very strong attachment to the business. But over time, they're reducing their ownership. But that's unspoken. I think it gets in the way of a lot of sales where someone realizes, well, what am I actually going to do with myself and my time? Even if I have all the money.
Yeah. It's there's a whole academic, there's a PhD thesis written by Dr. Ali Taylor, and it's called Role
From
Identity
Orange
Fusion.
Kiwi.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you're talking about, Michael.
Yeah.
It's the fact that, and it's a male thing particularly. She talks about the difference between males and females. Females are much better at this than we are, but males particularly are very attached to their role in the business. And if you take them out of it, by selling it or by moving on, or they don't need to work there anymore, they really struggle with it.
Yeah.
The other thing I think you see is there's a real focus, and I know the Exit Planning Institute in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I do a lot of work with those guys in the States. I speak at all their conferences and, I've been following them for a long time, 15 years. They've changed a lot of their language from exit and succession to building significant companies. They talk about that all the time now. So you don't necessarily need to exit to build a significant company, but you do need to be in a position where you don't have to go to work every day.
Yeah.
And so for most baby boomers, that becomes really attractive because they look at exiting and think, geez, I don't really want to do that. What am I going to do all day? I've been working 6 days a week for the last 25 years. What on earth am I going to do if I've got none of that?
Well, those, very deep personal questions have to be asked. And I mean, and pragmatically, it's if a business is centered around that one owner, it's a risk to the business. And I think they're recognizing that. So, but just not this sort of sharp, like in, sell, bang, move on.
Bang out. Yeah, that's right.
It leaves a lot of people, short. And frankly, I think bordering on, sad press, because
absolutely
that was something they did for 30, 40 years, and now it's not there. Yeah, but it takes good advisors to kind of start to unpick the financials, but also the personal side of it.
Very important.
I see a lot of activity around employee ownership and different ownership models, in particularly out of the UK, but into places like Slovenia and in the US. But so where's Australia in terms of our policy level or market acceptance of employee ownership as a really vital mechanism for transitioning businesses?
Yeah, I think that's changed dramatically since about 2015. So Malcolm Turnbull changed all the rules for employee share plans in 2015. And he did a really good job. He introduced that innovation agenda. He introduced the idea of employee share plans for startups, as he called them at that point, in the tech economy. But he also changed the rules on, traditional employee share plan models where people could defer the income. And that made it much more attractive. Every government since then has improved or tweaked the rules, whether it's taxation or corporations or, financial services, market documents and so on, to make it easier. No one's changed any of the rules to make it harder. They all agree that employee share plans are a good thing. Could we do more? Absolutely. I wrote a submission last year to a Senate inquiry about what could be done to improve the rules, but the rules work as they are now. I mean, that's the important point. Yes, the rules could be better. The legislation could be easier. The taxation could be slightly better. But really, the rules work the way they are now, and people are starting to see that these plans work. In the United Kingdom, they're talking a lot now about EOTs, or employee ownership trusts. Well, the structure we use is called a peak performance trust. It's a type of employee ownership trust. It's been around. The first one I did is 20 years old this next year. 2006, I set that up. So, they've been around for a while. We've fine-tuned them, we've tweaked them, we've added to them, but they work. The important message is the rules we've got here work. They work well. Yeah. There are a lot of plans in existence now. I've done more than 200 in the last 10 years, and all of them are up and running except one or two, mostly where those businesses have been subsequently sold. And so they work. And, you can start to see a bit of a trend. I think the issue starts to become more important when you're in a market. For example, engineers or financial planners have gone a long way down this path. There's a lot of firms in engineering and a lot of firms in financial planning that have got employee share plans. So if you're out there in the market looking for employees and you're an engineer and you haven't got an employee share plan, you will lose staff to someone who has, because staff love them. So, it becomes a bit of a market competition type thing. If you're recruiting people and you say, well, I'll pay you this and I'll do that, We've got this bonus scheme and you can do that. And somebody else says, well, I'll actually give you equity in the business that you work for so you can help build up value over time. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah. It's a pet topic of mine. Did this analysis of the average Australian family balance sheet, but houses, managed investments and furniture and fittings and motor vehicles, and down there is business equity. And there's this opportunity. I don't think we have enough prospective owners, but I think as a pathway to, if you're a really high performing professional and you can get a part of the equity in your firm, that's a pretty good pathway to turning on that owner mindset.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need much more of that, and pathways for technically skilled, experienced people to think not only about doing a really excellent job of whatever they do, but also building a business and employing other people and having on your own personal balance sheet equity in my business.
Absolutely. Yeah, they've long been widely regarded as a really excellent way in Australia and other countries to build wealth. The problem is, for most people, a lot of people look at them and think, gee, that's high risk. I'm going to go and borrow $2 million from the bank to buy a business.
If you can.
Now, you don't have to do that if you do it through an employee share plan. You're sharing that risk with 10 other people. The risk is already reduced because the key people are all locked in and focused. So there are ways to do it now through that shared equity type model where it can be quite successful.
Yeah. Just to go back, employee ownership trusts and your peak performance trust, you were very complimentary about it. It's working practically for you. But if you go down to, in the hierarchy of numbers of businesses, there's a lot that might be $2, $3, $4 million turnover, employing 5, 10, 15. Yep. I don't know what the costs are for implementing a peak performance trust, but is there another layer down where another light version, to get those owners, or is that just more about direct equity ownership?
No, look, there's not really a light version. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull's ESS startup plan is a light version. So I can tell you the numbers. I mean, it costs roughly $8,000 to set up a startup plan. Right, so it's pretty affordable for most businesses. And, the Turnbull government made it that way because that's how it had to work. And it does work. Yeah. The Peak Performance Trust is a much more complicated vehicle. And it's got to deal with a whole stack of compliance. But even that, I mean, that costs $30,000. So it's not a couple of hundred.
It's not prohibitive.
It's $30,000. And I actually said to someone the other day, the average cost of turnover of one staff member is 40% of their salary. Yeah. So if you've got an engineer that earns 40% of that salary is a lot more than setting up an employee share plan.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So you're probably better off thinking about it. Could it be cheaper and quicker and easier? Possibly. But I think around that level, it's affordable and manageable. And the ROI on that investment is quite solid.
Yeah. And look, the regular discussion I have is if you're an owner and you've got a business that you think is worth $1 million or $4 or you have to think in terms of a percentage of that value, that if you're going to exit, whether you want to exit tomorrow or whether you want to exit over 5 years, there's a few percent, to get a broker to sell your business, 5, 6, 7, 8%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cost, lawyers and accountants. So there's, I think, somewhere in the region of 5 or 10% of the value of your business. And it sounds like a lot. And, real estate agents might charge 1%. But the point is, if you're paying, if you invest well in that kind of advice and it's 5 to 10% of 1.5 million, instead of doing a lazy job and only getting $500,000, it pays for itself over and over again. So
correct.
The Peak Performance Trust, 30K thereabouts, is very approachable.
It should produce a pretty good ROI in the first 12 months. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hi there, just a short interruption and a message from Kerr Capital. Kerr Capital specialise in advising business owners who want to get sale ready or, as is increasingly common, get approached out of the blue by a potential buyer. If this is you, I know there'll be plenty of big questions and a lot of uncertainty. We're expert at supporting owners in making significant personal and business decisions and then helping create a really strong plan of action. If you want to find out more, contact us at the Kerr Capital website and then we can book a 45-minute no-obligation discovery call. Now let's head back to the podcast.
If we go out to more of the economy wide level, you're working with a couple of hundred. There's a lot of businesses out there that through Succession Plus, you recently published a report, maybe through the Exit Planning Institute, but it reinforced for me that the numbers of business owners that don't have an exit plan or a transition plan is still pretty high. So
it is.
There's a lot of room for growth.
Yeah, and look, I think unfortunately, whilst we've been talking about it a lot more, particularly people like you with podcasts and talking about owner and exit, I still think it's something that it's very easy for owners to put in the too hard basket or to put in the I'll do it next week, next month, next year basket, because there's so many other things they've got to do to run their business, and the compliance and all the day-to-day operational stuff needs to be done, and that's always urgent, so you can't push that aside. And so what happens is exit and succession planning becomes, I'll do that tomorrow, I'll get to that. Just let me launch this new product and then I'll do it. And let me just open this new warehouse and then I'll do it. And you get 5 years down the track and go, bloody hell, I'm 65. What happened? Now I've got to do it. Yeah. So I think the message is getting out there, but people are so busy. There's so many other things to do. This can get pushed to the side. And unfortunately, it's one of those things, I said to somebody the other day, you are going to exit. You just have a choice as to whether you plan it and manage it or whether someone does it to you. And if someone does it to you, it probably is not going to end as well as you'd like.
Yeah. I mean, we spend freely on insurances, have that discussion a lot. When business is good and you're full of energy and full of beans, it's the last thing on your mind, and it's easy to push out. Things happen. I don't know that really resonates with people, but maybe something more of an emotional hook where the business is important in that community or for those employees. And it's a bit of insurance that should, something happen to you, to challenge, to get more owners to start to think about it and open up and have honest conversations, and also get past any assumptions they might have, which is the way you can always sell your business by appointing somebody to help you, write an IM, advertise it, make a few calls, and there you go. Like it's never that easy.
No, it's not. And people, they have this unreal expectation that it's a bit like I can just sell my house, and you can, but you might necessarily get the right price for it. But what people need to understand is that businesses are much more complicated assets than a house. There's a lot more moving parts, and there's people, and there's equipment, and there's IP, and there's customers, and there's contracts, and it just becomes such a more complicated process. So thinking about this and starting it as early as possible will only get you a better outcome. There's no downside. If you get halfway through it, as I have with several clients, I had one client who was absolutely horrified. I thought something had happened to him or his family. He turned up in my office and said, "Oh, look, I don't know how to tell you this." And I said, "What's up?" And he said, "I don't want to sell anymore." And I said, "What are you worried about?" And he said, "I don't know how you're helping me get the business ready to sell." I said, "Yeah, but getting the business ready to sell doesn't mean you have to sell it. It just means it's saleable. And typically a saleable business is much less stressful. You're not working as hard. You're making just as much, if not more money." And some people do then decide, you know what? The reasons I wanted to sell was because I was tired and overworked and not making enough money. Well, they're all gone. I'm going to keep it.
Falling back in love with your business.
Correct.
That's that pitch for exit planning or succession planning is another part of that. Saying, well, if you link it to, we're going to sell you in 18 months' time, it's very binary. It may or may not happen, but you start making your business better tomorrow, which you should be. It makes good sense to start to build in some redundancy and resilience outside of just sharpen up the numbers. If you're going to stay in it, it's a good argument to say, well, you may as well get what you can from it as well.
Absolutely.
Takes a bit of consulting. Now, you're also the founder of Capitalize, which is, as I understand it, it's a business valuation piece of software. You plug in some numbers, and what I really liked about the stuff I read, I haven't played with it, but it kind of says, given the information you've given me, here's a potential valuation, and somewhere in the discussion you wanted this much, or you think you need that much, So there's a gap. Can you talk about Capitalize and the work you do to bridge that gap?
And the gap in terms of exit planning, I might start with the gap first and then talk about the software if that's all right. So in terms of exit planning, we typically talk about 3 gaps. And the 3 gaps that you see in nearly every business is, one is a profit gap. So it's making less money than it could or should. for a whole stack of reasons, but there's a profit gap. That then often leads to a value gap, and the value gap's what you're talking about, Michael. There's a difference between what the business is worth today and what it could be or should be worth. And the last one, which often is a result of those first two, is then there's a wealth gap for the owner that says, well, I actually need more than that to retire or whatever. Now, the value gap is the one that really is changeable. That's the one you can really focus on. And what the software does, I mean, I wrote this very selfishly for internal use at Succession Plus.
Yeah.
I now sell it to 300 advisors in 8 different countries. So the model's changed. But the issue was most business owners don't know what their business is worth. They don't know why it's worth that. So in other words, they don't know whether it's 2 or 2.5 or 1.5, and they don't know what the difference is and why. And secondly, they don't know what it could be or should be worth. So what the software does, as you said, we get your accounting information from Xero or Moab or QuickBooks or whatever you use. We bring that into the platform. We get a whole stack of benchmarking and industry and economic data, and we get that externally. And then we get information about your business. You know, which industry do you operate in? How long have you had it? Who manages it? What's the HR system look like? What's the governance system? You know, there's about 100 questions.
Yeah.
All of that goes together and it comes out with a report, and the report's called a business insights report. Now, we do this with every single client. So no matter what anyone approaches us about, if somebody comes to Succession Plus and talks about exit or succession, I want to sell, I want a share plan, I want to give it to my kids, I want to whatever, we say, okay, start with this, because you don't know, and I certainly don't know anywhere near enough about your business yet to tell you what to do. So let's get an insights report, and it's a deep dive 60-page report. It covers every single aspect of the business, finances, and it's done really with a buyer or an investor or a lender's view. What are they going to look at? If I take this business to market tomorrow, what's a buyer going to find? What are they going to say about it? What are they going to like? What are they going to not like? What are they going to look at and go, oh, gee, that's not great. That's a real problem. That's a high risk area. And so what that does is educate the owner about what they've actually got. There's a pretty famous book in exit planning in the United States written by a guy called Justin Goodbread. And it's actually called Your Baby is Ugly. And it talks to business owners about the fact that what they think is this beautiful business is actually pretty ugly most times.
Right.
So this report, bit nicer worded than that, but it helps you see from a buyer's point of view, what does my business actually look like? How attractive is it? Or how ugly is it? What are the things that need to be done to improve it? The report finishes, the last page is basically evaluation today, the value gap, and what the valuation could be tomorrow. And that's the piece that owners, I find, really jump into. Owners really say, wow, it's worth 6 million now, but are you telling me it could be worth 8? You say, yes, it could be worth 8. What do I need to do? Okay, let's go and look at all the things you need to do. And there might be 50 of those, but owners get really excited by that. They sort of look at that and go, oh, geez, that's pretty interesting. You're telling me I can add $2 million of value. And it's not only adding $2 million of value, it's making it more attractive, less risky, easier to run, less sleepless nights, worrying about things. Like it's got a whole stack of other benefits as well.
The potential, if you implement that kind of stuff, is that the potential for falling back in love is probably pretty high, right? Because
absolutely,
it really, and I imagine in some cases, it's why didn't I do this a bit earlier? Because it's all
often,
common sense, and what it sounds like is, and what we want to avoid is owners getting a valuation in prep for a sale and almost saying, well, I got a value, so therefore it's worth this much money. And no surprise, a lot of that is driven by someone wanting to list the business and it sounds attractive, or even, buyers, trade and industry buyers come in and make offers to businesses off market, and it's always quite attractive. But subject to these things. Here, you do need to understand the value of your business, but also why and how to, if there's a pathway to that gap. And I'd say most businesses have a number of pathways to making it.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's nearly always things you can do to improve the value of your business. Yeah. And so the message to owners also is, I get frustrated sometimes because people walk in and say, oh, my business is actually only worth what someone will pay. And I say, yes, but you can influence that.
Yeah.
It's not a, 2025 Toyota Camry where the price is the price and everyone's the same except one's been in an accident and one hasn't. You can influence the price of your business. It's just whether you're prepared to go and do the time and effort and work to actually make it change. And the change from most businesses, we very, very rarely see one that's got no value gap. When we do see one, it's generally speaking, $1 million, $2 million that you can actually improve the value of that business. Now, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, so that's again
owners.
where if you start to budget 5 or 6 or 10% of the expected proceeds as insurance on doing all this stuff, and you pick up $1 million on 3, like the
Correct.
percentages don't matter. It's like you've so far ahead in hundreds and hundreds of thousands ahead.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that the software does is it tracks those changes in value all the time, every month.
Yeah.
So I had an owner the other day. He's been working with one of my advisors. I don't work with many clients anymore, but he's been working with one of my advisors, and he came in all fired up and he said to me, Craig, I've paid this guy nearly $100,000 over the last 2 years. I said, oh, have you? Let's have a look. So I log into the software. I pull up the dashboard, which is the homepage, and his business valuation has gone up $1.6 million in that 2-year period. And I said, his name was actually Michael. I said to him, Michael, your business has gone up $1.6 million and you've paid me $100,000. Do you want to swap?
16x return.
And he just went dead quiet. He just said to me, no, mate, it's all good.
Now that
but people they don't remember that. They don't see that. They just see, I paid you $100,000, which is a lot of money. Let's be honest. But if you can make a return on that, and we're not going to say we get a 16 times return every time, but even if you got a 5 times return, it's a huge improvement.
And so critical in there is starting with a credible valuation and revisiting it regularly. I imagine in the employee share plans that there's also a process for some point. I might be wrong here. Sharing this is how we're increasing the value of your investment. Because
we update those valuations every year, and we share it with the team every year so that everybody knows, we're on the track, we're on the path. If you show employees the aspirational vision, the dream, okay, I've got a business that looks like this today, I want it to look like that, and then you share with them on the journey, okay, we're on the pathway, we hit a bit of a speed hump here because something happened or whatever, but we're still on the pathway. Don't forget, we're still going from 6 to 8 million. They buy into it. They're vested in it.
It's I do want to go back to that comment on it's only worth what the market will pay. That is what we're dealing with, because there's a lot of advisors, a lot of owners who accept that as the way things are, and it's lazy just to put a business out there. I've run a lot of expression of interest sale processes, and it was actually trying to determine what the market would pay or what a buyer would pay. Right. All the information was made available if they were credible. The only missing piece was you have to put your offer. If you want to play, you want to be involved in potentially acquiring, you've got all the data, you've got all the information about how the business, but you have to come up with a number, and it frustrated the bejesus out of some heart. But the range kept hitting home that the range of values for this, we've got this business here. That's the business there on the page. Someone would say it's worth 400,000. Someone else would say 800.
Yeah,
because we don't know why they're buying or what their situation is, and there are strategic buyers and there are financial buyers and there are all sorts of opportunistic buyers who see things differently. Same numbers, same address, same everything, but for them that in terms of what the market will pay is a credible way to do that. But it's not just saying, lazy, let's just see what happens. You've got to structure that. But as you said, educate the market, educate the owners.
But there's always things you can do to improve any asset. You could also just turn up at home today and put your house on the market on Saturday, and you'll get a price for it, and who cares? But if you spend 2 months, get it repainted, landscape the garden, fix the gutter and fill up the hole in the backyard, do all those things, you'll get a better price. Now in business, there's 20 different ways you can do that.
Yeah, and the quantum is so much. If you ask the punters, should that be the multiple for that business be 2 or 3? And there's good reason to say 2, there's good reason to say 3, but that's a massive
big difference.
It's a massive, like with a property, everyone can look up and you see if you really want, you can find out. And so you're going to be within
fairly close to the mark.
UK seems to get a lot of the coverage, in terms of, employee ownership and the benefits for employees. They talk a lot about that. I have
real interest in how, the owners, how it's a better pathway out, how it's a more assured pathway out. But is it, with all of you compile data on business value when employee ownership program is implemented. So what is that telling you about?
Yeah. So we actually just published some data from our existing client base. We've got nearly 200 of these plans running. So we've got a lot of data. Some of them have been running for more than 10 years. So we've got a valuation point every year for 10 years. The basic gap between businesses that have got employee ownership and get advice around exit and succession planning and those that don't is about 30%. Now it's 30% year on year. So if you start to add that up over 5 years, it just compounds. And, after 5 years, you're talking about a business that's worth twice as much as the one that doesn't have an employee share plan. The important thing to point out is it's not the share plan itself. That's not the magic pill. The magic pill is all of those things put together. So the employee share plan, the education of staff, the corporate governance structures, understanding what drives the valuation, all those pieces put together, working with an advisor that understands what you can do to improve the value of the business. All of that will give you a pretty accelerated result in terms of value growth or value acceleration.
Staff retention, productivity, culture,
all adds up.
It's if you've got a really good business, you'll get approaches from within your industry, and that might be just what you want to do. But for a lot of others, often they're concerned about going to competitors. That there's good reason to go to competitors often. If you want to sell, employees are also. I do think I'm not sure how ready all employees are for employee ownership, but over time, I can only see that being one of the top exit options. And if you're in, and that may have the benefit of the business being able to be sustained as is, with a longer run out for the owner and a longer buy-in for the employee. So I really do think the future's needs a really strong employee ownership mentality and supporting.
Yeah, and we're seeing that. The numbers of inquiries we get per day, per week has gone up substantially in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Substantially, like 400% in that 5-year period. Yeah. It's massive.
All right. So, Craig, got a few owners listening in. They're starting to think about their exit plan, which is probably where a lot of it starts. What's your advice to them about exit planning generally? What are the 2 or 3 key steps leading to your advice in terms of employee ownership specifically?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of exit planning generally, it's really simple. Start as early as you possibly can, including for younger people. The day you set up your company, begin with the end in mind. Think about what the exit's going to look like and how do you build for that. Secondly, understand valuation. You don't have to become an expert. I'm not trying to turn you into an accountant or anything like that, but understand what drives the value of your business. It's different for all different businesses. Yeah. Understand that. I would say get a valuation done, understand the key drivers, and then focus. When you run your business day to day and you make decisions, your main focus then should be on how do I grow that equity value? Not necessarily how do I make more profit this month or this quarter or whatever. You need to make profit, by the way, but you should be focused on how do I build the long-term equity value of that business? And then one of the key challenges for most business owners will be as they get to a certain size where it's above and beyond themselves and their immediate family will be their people. And that's where the employee share plan starts to become a consideration to say, hey, I've got 5 key people here, and if 2 of them leave, I've got a big problem. And as the business gets bigger and you end up with 100 people, now 20 of them leave, you've got a problem. So you want to start to think about, do I use an employee share plan as part of that option? The only issue with employee share plans is they're not a quick-term exit solution. So if you've got 60 days to exit your business, an employee share plan is not going to work.
Yeah.
If you've got 6 months, it's probably not even going to work. But if you've got 6 years, it will definitely work. And if you're smart enough to plan it early enough and think about it long term, it doesn't have to be the entire exit strategy, but it should be part of the strategy to lock those key people in.
You talked about that, just being competitive in terms of recruiting new staff. Like if you're going to grow your business, salary, or there are things that may not be enough on their own, you need some greater incentive or some
absolutely
connection for the business. In closing, if you were plucked to head up Australia's federal small business department, and you put your feet under the cabinet desk next Monday, what would your priorities be to build a more resilient small business economy?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to get rid of the regulation and compliance and red tape. A lot of it's there for a reason, and we need a lot of it to protect people and consumers and employees and all that sort of stuff. That's mainly because there's a few bad eggs in lots of industries. But when I look at business owners today, I mean, I've got a business, I've only got 22 people here, but I spend a lot of time doing paperwork and lodging returns and forms. And, I think if we could free people up from doing some of that, that would be a great outcome. The second thing is I would make funding much more available for small businesses. The United States has a whole department that does small business loans. Yeah. They're fairly easy to get. They're fairly simple to justify, and you can go and fund your business the way that it needs to be funded to go and grow. So that's not easy in Australia. That's quite a difficult thing to do in Australia. So the second one would be funding. And the third one would be, I think, and it's probably more critical of the owners themselves than the government, but maybe what it's about is education, and that is that it's worth paying for good advice in any area. I think, unfortunately, Australians have got this DIY mentality. She'll be right, mate, I'll work it out. I spoke to a guy the other day, he says, I said, what are you doing? He said, I've spent the last 2 days redesigning all my Google ad campaigns. I said, you got an advertising and marketing background? He said, no, I don't know anything about it. I said, why are you doing it? Like, what are you doing? I actually said to him jokingly, but not joking, I said, do you do your own root canal work? Like, seriously, mate, what are you doing? And so I think we've got to re-educate owners that you can pay for good advice in all different, accounting advice, legal advice, marketing advice, exit planning advice, and a whole stack of other things. If you do it well and you find the right advisors, your ROI will be much better than what it costs you.
Yeah.
So I think they're probably the three key things.
Good stuff. On that one, there's so many ways to outsource, to bring in the right expertise, but you've got to identify it. And I start everything I do with a look at the numbers and the potential value. So, okay, from here, but you're going to spend half a day doing that when you could be focused on whatever you do best.
Yeah, play to your strength.
That's gonna feed better into your valuation in 12 months' time.
Absolutely.
That was terrific. Thank you, Craig. I really, really appreciate you taking time to come on
Pleasure.
to the Owner to Owner podcast. You've been at this for a long time, thought leader, 6 times author. You're a director and chair of quite a number of organisations. If someone wants to reach out to you to chat about exit planning, employee ownership, what's the easiest way?
Yeah, look, there's 2 easy ways. One is just LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, obviously. I'm pretty easy to find on there. I've got a whole stack of material on there as well.
Yeah.
And then our website, which is just succession.plus, has a stack of materials, white papers, the books you talked about, everything's free to download and so on. So feel free to reach out. I'm very happy to help. Good
on you. I can feel that. Excellent chat. Great to catch up too, Craig, and I wish you really well.
Good to see you, Michael.
So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Owner to Owner and got some helpful advice and maybe some more clarity on how to make your business work better for you. To subscribe or to listen back or to access any of the resources or information we talked about in this episode, head over to the website owner2ownerpodcast.com.au, or you can search up Owner to Owner podcast on your favourite pod player. If this episode or the podcast generally is really helpful, I'd love it if you could leave me a like, a rating or a review, but even more than that, I'd love it if you could share it with another business owner. There's a new episode out every couple of weeks. I'll catch you then.